We're here to try and talk.
Are you kidding?
Abby wrote a nice blog post about how.
All right, so thank you for joining us today. I am here to welcome you. This is a panel sponsored by the Institute for Global Security Law and Policy on a post-election recap. I'm actually going to let the panelists introduce themselves. We have quite a number of people up here, all of whom have expertise in different areas of constitutional law, politics, and election law, and will provide a very interesting discussion for you here. For those of you who are still coming in, as I said, there are seats scattered, and we do have an overflow room in A57.
Right. Hi, my name is Avi Cover. I'm the director of the Institute for Global Security Law and Policy and also teach a clinic on civil rights, human rights, and immigration.
You introduce it?
Yes, please. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure,
I'm
please.
Jonathan Enton. I teach constitutional law, administrative law, and I have had an appointment in the political science department with my colleague to the right.
I'm Joe White. I'm the Luxembourg Family Professor of Public Policy in the Department of Political Science, and I am currently teaching a course on the presidency, and next semester we'll teach Introduction to American Politics. I am not very happy.
I'm Jonathan Adler. I'm the Johan Verheij Memorial Professor here at the Law School, and I direct the Center for Business Law and Regulation.
I'm Juscelino Colares. I teach in the civil procedure, international trade law, climate change related courses, and I'm currently the deputy director of the Financial Integrity Institute.
My name is Jessie Hill. I'm professor and associate dean for academic affairs here at the law school. My areas are constitutional law and civil rights, and within constitutional law, I specialize in reproductive rights and church and state, First Amendment religion clauses.
Okay, so let me just explain how we're going to try and make these next 55 minutes work. I'm going to moderate the discussion, and we're going to allow each of the panelists to really just have a couple minutes to give their general thoughts on the election and the outcome, and have a little bit of a conversation about that. We'll try and allow each of them to discuss a little bit in their area of expertise and what we might expect in a Trump presidency as well. And then we'll try and ensure that there's about 20 minutes of discussion. Obviously, there is a reception afterward where more discussion can follow, both with the panelists and amongst all of us here. So as you see, the panel is called the Election 2016, the day after, and that may have been a subconscious invocation of a 1980s TV movie about a nuclear holocaust and the survival afterward. But be that as it may, and obviously we had no, well, I can't speak for everyone here, I don't know, different predictions perhaps about the outcome. I do want to offer for some of you what may be a sobering observation made by some, for some maybe a source of elation, but that while most people often say that those campaigning for the presidency make a lot of promises they don't keep, actually, political scientists have found that most presidential candidates keep about 70% of their campaign promises. So of President Obama's 500 or so promises, PolitiFact determined that just over 71% of those were either achieved or achieved in some compromised fashion. So keep that in mind as we look toward the next few days, months, and years.
How do you measure the importance of the promise?
Well, that may be for each of you to make that assessment. I assume for some of you.
Sort of a useless statistic, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I think some people might assume none are kept, but
The point is,
I'll let you make that calculation as to whether it's pointless. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to turn it over now to Joe White to offer a few observations first about the election, and then we'll allow each of the panelists to comment as well.
Well, I guess the first thing to remember about the election is that this was an election the Republicans were supposed to win, or at least come very close to winning. The fundamentals of the election were that the Democrats had been in office for 2 terms. It is rare for the same party to win the presidency 3 terms in a row. The economy was growing modestly, not in a way that would generally overcome that sort of time for change effect. It looked for a long time as if the Democrats would win the election because while normally the candidates cancel each other out because they're sort of equally good or equally mediocre, in this case it looked like one candidate was bad and the other was noticeably worse. And that showed up in the polls for a while, but there was always reason to suspect that at the end, the Republicans who were claiming to be really bothered by Trump because of his various infelicities of phrase would come home because really the higher income Republicans would probably benefit from Trump's policies and don't much like Hillary anyway. I won't say I predicted it. I said that it was about a 1 in 3 chance on the morning of Tuesday that Trump would win the Electoral College. If you look at what sort of should have happened, it's not a big surprise that a Republican won this election. Now, it's a big surprise that it was Donald Trump, but the first thing to remember about that is he was the nominee. So he was a Republican nominee. One of those two people had to win. The second thing to remember is that what's unusual about this election is the coalitions on each side. In other words, there's a certain amount of people who might have either not voted or voted Democratic, who this time voted Republican, namely the famed white working class in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But again, it's really hard to see what Clinton was offering those people. It's fairly clear to see the diagnosis and prescription that Trump was offering for those people. And so, he lost some other people because of some of the ways he tried to appeal to those people. But, on the whole, this election should not have shocked people in the way it did. And I'm saying that, and that I was depressed and disappointed and all that, but I had been telling people, watch it, because what we know in political science was that this was supposed to be a very close election.
Well, I am as appalled as anybody about the person who has won the election. I wasn't shocked either, but I guess I have a couple of general points. The first is that we have been in bad places in this country before, after presidential elections. There are people in this room who had me for constitutional law and know how much time I spend on the 1800 election before I get to Marbury against Madison. We've had other difficult elections, 1824, 1876, when there was the potential for competing armies marching into Washington if the wrong person was chosen as president. 1968, 2000. I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't believe, though, that there was a golden age. We got through those times, and I am reasonably confident we will get through this time, although some not very pleasant things may happen in the meantime. As I was watching the returns last night, though, I thought about two old quotations. The first was from P.T. Barnum, "A sucker's born every minute." I think that one's pretty obviously relevant. The other one comes from Will Rogers, the humorist, actor, commentator. Will Rogers once said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." And I think that part of what we have seen is that the Democratic Party faces some significant challenges in getting its act together. I don't want to take up too much time, but basically, if you look at the Democratic Party in Ohio, it's kind of illustrates the state of the National Democratic Party. There are old folks, Ted Strickland, Hillary Clinton. There were young folks in Ohio. P.G. Sittenfeld, if anybody remembers him, 31 years old. He was the alternative for the Senate for the Democrats. There's nobody in between. It's like France between the wars. And in an important sense, one of the big challenges, I think, for those of us who are liberals and who are unhappy about the outcome of the election, notwithstanding the political science fundamentals that Joe's talked about, the real question at this point is, how does the Democratic Party or some other entity put together a kind of reasonably coherent strategy for the future? There should be lots of opportunities if there are people to come along and take advantage of them. But right now, I'm not sure who those folks are or what the odds are. So let me leave it at that and pass it on to Jonathan Adler.
Okay. Yeah, a couple observations. One is, I think, just to build off what Jonathan just said about the parties, there's a dynamic that often occurs when you have one party in control of the presidency for 2 terms, that they draw a lot of the talent out of the states, and it gives the other party the ability to build their farm team. Over the last 8 years, that's happened far more than one would expect. There have been stories in Real Clear Politics, NPR, other places, about how over the last 8 years, whatever happened in the Republican primaries for the presidential race, in Senate delegation, House delegation, state legislatures, state houses in terms of governorships, the Republican Party has consistently expanded its reach and its control. I think 3 more governorships flipped yesterday, and that is somewhat, to me at least, paradoxical given what went on in the presidential primaries, that you have Republicans holding a wider array of seats, a wider array of state houses, and yet didn't seem interested in any of those sorts of folks in terms of a presidential nominee. In the votes yesterday, in most states, it appears that Republican Senate candidates, for example, ran well ahead of Donald Trump. But the 2 sitting Republican senators who lost, or one who we know lost, one who appears to have lost, Kirk and Ayotte, are the 2 that were probably the most critical of Trump of any of the sitting senators in competitive races. So this paradox that, here in Ohio, throughout the country, Republican Senate candidates outperformed Donald Trump. That down ballot Republicans did much better than they even did on the presidential ballot, and yet the Republican Senate candidates that were most critical of him seems not to do quite as well. I'm not entirely sure what we make of that. 2 other really quick thoughts looking forward. One is to, I guess, further build on Jonathan's point. Looking forward, I think for the Democratic Party at least, things appear tougher. If you look at 2018 and the Senate races that are up, there are 2 or 3 Republican Senate seats that are likely to be competitive. There are between 8 and 11 Democratic Senate seats that are likely to be competitive. Democrats control 2/3 of the seats that will be up in 2018. So just from a resource standpoint, a lot more terrain to defend. And if you look at race by race, much harder races to defend, which could have an influence on things like, for example, does Joel Manchin of West Virginia, a state that I think Trump got 65% or 70% of the vote yesterday, he's up for re-election in 2 years. Is he going to feel better running as a Republican than as a Democrat, given that's how he votes anyway? Quite possible. Last thought, just in terms of what happens with the Trump administration. Generally, I think it's fair to say people are policy, and what really matters in a presidential administration is who are the 3,000 or 4,000 people that staff all the agencies and all the positions. I think that's particularly important when you have a president that, as best we can tell, does not have a high degree of policy expertise or concern about the nitty-gritty of policy. There are a lot of news reports already trying to get a sense on what the transition team looks like, who the various players will be. I take all of those stories with a grain of salt. I'm not really sure there's that much organization. But in terms of what a Trump administration looks like, especially domestic policy-wise, the makeup of that 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people matters a huge deal. And real questions are, among kind of Republican policy wonks where the Never Trump movement was particularly strong, do those people change their mind? And are they willing to serve in a Republican administration? A lot of us probably are not, Joel. So, and
Plenty will.
yeah, but will they be the ones you would want to serve? I.e., will they be the ones that actually understand how things work, or are they the people looking to pad their resumes? I don't think we know, but we'll want to pay attention to that.
I'll start with a couple of very quick comments, general comments about the election, and then go into a little bit more detail about what I think might happen in the trade area, in the climate change area as well. In terms of political instincts, you have to tip your hat to Donald Trump. He perfected the Kim Kardashian model of celebrity. It used to be that for you to be a celebrity, you have to have some kind of natural talent, and then you become a celebrity banking off of that, particular acumen, talent, whatever. And Kim Kardashian and the Kardashian sisters, they basically perfected the model by basically saying, why do we need the celebrity? You actually can become famous by doing a sex tape or by doing whatever, and then you can become instantly, a celebrity, and then you can make money out of people talking about you. And I believe that Donald Trump played this masterfully in the Republican primary, where he basically recognized that he could beat a field of establishment politics by simply, making the case that instead of you donors picking or one of these guys to represent your interests, cut the middleman again, like the Kardashians. Cut the middleman. Cut the politician. You are the billionaire, or however. I mean, Mark Cuban has problems with his own with Trump's stated wealth. But cut the middleman. You are the guy. You are the person, who will be the politician. You don't need a politician to actually do what you say and for you to finance him or her, and then for him or her not to do what he or she promised to you later on. You become it. And I believe Donald Trump is an absolute, I have no fear of saying this, he's an absolute genius at actually recognizing this early in the process and outwriting, Ted Cruz, outwriting and Marco Rubio, people that are more schooled, but that are more perceived as establishment. The second general comment I'd like to make is that we obviously live in an age of identity politics, right? The notion that we have cultural wars in our very divided country is not news, and that the candidate that won absolutely exploited that with great acumen. He played to to people's identity much more than Hillary. He talked to people as if he understood exactly, though he's not a policy wonk or not inclined to think in terms of policy at all, but he talked to people in terms that they could understand in simple arguments. Again, he never explained himself, right? He never wasted time explaining himself. He would just basically attack. He lost, arguably, the three debates, but he just kept on generating the narrative, creating, the next news cycle. He was always on top of it. He is a PR genius. And this is not, this should not surprise anybody. He played the game, and in an age of identity politics, he was able to mobilize the people who believed what he said. Whether or not he believes those things or will do those things is a separate matter. And we're going to get to that. but he made people believe that with greater intensity than Hillary did. And for that, I mean, he should be, recognized, and that's why he won. Now, as to how that acumen and how that competence in terms of PR management, managing his brand, managing perceptions, and managing people and talking to people's feelings, how that can be converted into an administration, it's a different game. He's now the target. He's not only, the stone to the glass window. He's now the glass window at the same time. So he loses some of that strength, and he gets some of that weakness. But again, he gains the strength of the office. In terms of how he can impact our country, I would just talk about two quick areas. Trade, media. Trade media is basically circulating that Dan D'Amico, former chief executive of Nucor Steel, North Carolina-based steel company, is slated to be his USTR. Dan D'Amico, as CEO of his company, achieved a great success in the courts in the United States by challenging trade protectionism or trade management practiced by countries that export steel to the United States. And he was able to stave off some of that impact by mounting a very strong legal team that basically garnered some of these victories in federal courts. So he is known as a pro-national industry person. He is known as not necessarily a trade protectionist businessman, but someone who has, in the past few years, given very strong statements and strong indications that we need to change the game on trade, that we need to be more activist in policing these trade agreements, which is exactly the narrative of Donald Trump. Mind you that up until, I believe it's 15 days ago, he had not met Donald Trump in person, but he was in constant contact with him. So I believe that as a new STR, if he becomes the new United States Trade Representative, he will absolutely hit a pause button on a number of new trade initiatives. I believe that depending on the importance that in the next administration that the State Department, National Security Advisor's office is going to have in the White House, that may be mitigated somewhat because there are strong geopolitical interests that would militate for the United States to approve the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an agreement that I myself oppose because I don't believe that it surrenders some interesting trade advantages in terms of tariff treatments with some countries that the United States have only to protect monopolies. So this agreement is very little about free trade and much more about protecting monopolies from intellectual property holders and other companies. So I do believe that depending on the strength that Mr. D'Amico has in the administration, the news for free traders is very bad. The immediate losers are China. Clearly, there is a huge debate right now on the oversupply, the excess supply of steel in the world markets. So China is a definite loser in this. And the trade agenda in general suffers very much from this. In terms of climate change, there are indications that the next person to be indicated as to head EPA is Myron Ebell, director of the Center for Energy and Environment at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I believe that if Donald Trump makes his good on his campaign promises, as Professor Carver mentioned before, the Clean Power Plant is not going. It will go. It might. There's a stalemate in the courts. It might pass. It will be heard for argument. Is it November or in January?
DC Circuit heard it in September.
September. And so that might be, it may be finally defeated in a new Supreme Court. Clean Power, Paris Climate Agreement, that's another issue. The United States has, the agreement went into effect November 5th with the approval by the last country that brought the total of signatory countries to the 55% of all global emissions. So that is a U.S. commitment. The president can do what presidents have done before, basically like in the ICC case, the International Criminal Court, be a part of it and then just withdraw. So the news on climate is absolutely atrocious. It's very horrible. But maybe it's not horrible that much if if members of his administration try to at least preserve some of the concepts, some of the market-based concepts that can be used in terms of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. There is such a thing as an environmental harm to carbon emissions, and that harm is not only measurable but priceable. You can measure that. You can give a price to that. And if he is indeed faithful to his market inclinations, clean air and changes to the climate are not free. So we may be in for surprises, but the indications are not that that we are not going to get any surprises. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I want to begin by thanking my male colleagues on this panel for showing, nonetheless, despite the result in last night's election, showing solidarity with the Hillary campaign by wearing pantsuits to work today.
I forgot my dress.
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add in general about the election. I have some thoughts about some specifics also, which I'll particularly about reproductive rights, but I'll hold off on that for the moment. I mean, I guess, before the election, my great fear was that once Hillary was elected, the Democrats would not realize the need in the Democratic Party to reach out to white working class voters, and that this would come home to roost in the 2018 midterm elections, and that it would be a disaster. I think that writing has been on the wall for the Democratic Party for a very long time, and maybe those chickens just came home to roost a little sooner. I think it's true that the party is a bit of a mess, and as Professor Enton said, and they've got to realize that right now. Although I have to wonder also whether mainstream Republicans are feeling very much happiness about this situation as well, of course, because it's not really their ideology of limited government and free trade and so on that won the day either. So I guess I think we've kind of gone through everyone and talked for a while, so maybe I will just stop there and then let.
Yeah, but actually, in the interest of time, Dean Hill, I'd encourage you to maybe perhaps discuss a little bit about reproductive health.
Okay, so I'll take like 2 minutes to talk about reproductive health then. Great. So, I mean, I think that what is going to be the impact on sort of reproductive rights, if we start with Roe v. Wade, I think for now, Roe is safe. The whole woman's health case from this last term was decided by a 5-3 margin, so whoever fills the vacancy that was left by Justice Scalia is not in a position to make a difference with the sort of fundamental judgment and the sort of bedrock status of Roe for now. I'll also say that Obama has reshaped the lower federal courts to a large degree. It really has made a difference. He's made a lot of appointees, and I think for now, reproductive rights are, stand a good chance after the Supreme Court's decision from last term of staying intact. I mean, there are some details we could get into the weeds a little bit more. I think there are places where Kennedy, who was the fifth vote there in that case, the Supreme Court case last term, would get off the train, and so I don't think he's the strongest advocate for reproductive rights. But, it remains a question about what's going to happen. How long basically does Ruth Bader Ginsburg have to hold on? Is it till 2018? Is it till 2020? Is it beyond that? Is the bigger question in my mind. And not to mention Breyer and Kennedy. And then don't forget also about contraception and Obamacare, which expanded access, required coverage of contraception. There's been a long ongoing battle over whether religious employers have to cover contraception the same way that non-religious employers do for their employees. Will this go away with the, pending Obamacare repeal? Seems likely. Another possibility is that it stays in place, but there's a really big exemption for anyone who has a conscientious reason for opting out. I mean, I don't know if that's even if it's even likely to stay around. Maybe insurance companies will keep contraceptive coverage in their plans anyway. For the most part, because it is very cost effective, but there are certain forms of contraception like IUDs that have big upfront out-of-pocket costs if you're not insured, and that are expensive for insurers to cover, that they are not likely to go back to covering if they get out from under the requirements of Obamacare. And that makes a difference. That's really by far the most effective form of birth control out there. It is, a lot of people think it is largely, its wide accessibility is responsible for plummeting abortion rates across the country. And so, again, that is likely to have an impact that may be sort of an unintended consequence as well.
Okay, if I might just talk briefly about national security.
There's not a black person up there, and I have to say that.
Miss, I do not disagree with your characterization. I'm going to address actually some issues related to race, if you would just let me. Well,
I'm going to address some things that have to do with race. What I do not understand is why the panel is discussing why this is normal. It is not a normal, this is not a failure of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. This is not a function of identity politics. This is a person who ran a campaign on putting into policy.
Miss, can I tell you, we're broadcasting this. It's not going to even be captured on the microphone, so you're speaking to a limited audience. If you would please just let us convene the panel. I appreciate your concern and the intensity of your concerns, but if you would let...
Because what I'm trying to tell you...
Miss, that's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair to everyone here. I do, and you know what? I will certainly let you have a microphone and have your moment to ask a question and make a comment. But we do have an agenda here, ma'am.
My point had to do with your opening, is that nobody has addressed that what his policies are suggesting are to actually institutionalize and undermining what we have spent at least since Reconstruction putting in. And so what I want you to do as you move forward is to address what he campaigned on in his policies would do that.
Yeah, and if you might allow me, I actually am prepared to talk about some of this. It may not meet everything that you expect and hope to hear, but we will have that discussion. Thank you. So I do want to talk a little bit about national security and law enforcement, and some of it does certainly touch on the difficult issues of race. In particular, in the area of national security and foreign affairs, it should be noted that presidents, generally speaking, always win. They have an incredible amount of discretion. That's a historical accretion of power that chief executives have gotten. And so it's easy to assume and expect that the president is going to get a lot of deference, both from the legislature, obviously it's the same party, and from the courts, right? To the extent that courts are generally loath to step in and address the president's actions addressing national security, and it takes a long time. With that said, presidents can, and not unlike in climate change, for example, the president can, and as he has suggested he will, I should say the president-elect, he can rip up the UN Iran nuclear agreement, right? It's a bilateral agreement. He can do that. He can, in fact, go forward on his ban on Muslims. Now, how would the courts react to that? I imagine over time they would probably react negatively, but he can, in fact, through his executive power, do that. The concerns that I have, and that many in the national security establishment have about Trump, is that first, he displays a near total ignorance and lack of curiosity about issues concerning national security. His willingness to leave NATO, ignoring the fact that it has ensured 77 years of great powers peace.
Stalin's been gone a long time.
Trump has done more than any single person to undo 2 presidents' earnest and consistent protests that the United States is not at war with Islam. His promise of a ban on Muslims would no doubt push that back, and in fact, you can see in al-Shabaab recruitment videos Trump calling for a ban on Muslims entering the U.S. The video warns, tomorrow it will be a land of religious discrimination and concentration camps. Donald Trump has promised to commit war crimes, right? Torture, waterboarding. He has praised dictators like Vladimir Putin, has displayed little or any concern for human rights and international obligations. He has been disinclined to repudiate white nationalists like David Duke and the KKK, and is inclined to make grandiose and pompous comments on areas of national security, such as, I know more about ISIS than the generals do. Believe me, I know what to do, and I would know how to bring ISIS to the table. His is a mindset of impetuous action and rash behavior, a very dangerous concern in an area of national security. Now, a word about law enforcement. Presidents also have a lot of discretion to either prosecute or not prosecute. And that is certainly a great concern and a very real concern here in Cleveland. The Department of Justice is a party to the consent decree that addresses police brutality here in Cleveland. It is not, it seems to me, a dubious suggestion that an attorney general, whether it is a Rudolph Giuliani, a Chris Christie, or whomever Donald Trump would appoint, would not be inclined to push the Civil Rights Division and the assistant U.S. attorneys here in Cleveland to enforce that agreement, and indeed might diminish its force in any way. So these are real concerns. Issues of race in particular, Donald Trump has, of course, spoken quite positively about stop and frisk policies, and so concerns about that, and in terms of how he would address policing, are, I think, raise very real concerns. I want to let the panelists, if they want to cover any other substantive areas, otherwise we will allow some questions from the audience.
Well, I just a couple of points here. One of the irritating things about this campaign was how the presidential candidates talk about, I will do this, I will do that, about all sorts of national problems that presidents don't have much to do with. The behavior of the Cleveland Police Department is one of them. It is true that an aggressive Department of Justice could, through the consent decree, have some positive effect on the behavior of the Cleveland Police Department. However, in general, the behavior of police departments is not particularly under the control of mayors, never mind of presidents. And the racial patterns that we have seen in policing have developed with essentially no involvement from presidents of the United States at all. And so I think that it's important to understand that while Trump will do nothing good for race relations that I can imagine, many of the problems in this country about things like policing are simply not federal, not national government issues. The second thing, and that's true even of some of the sentencing stuff, because most of the sentencing occurs in state levels, because most of the prosecutions and crimes are at state level. The second thing I want to emphasize is that we do not know what the heck Trump's policies are on a lot of things, because Trump doesn't know what the heck his policies are on a lot of things. And while it's very important to emphasize who will be appointed to the positions down the bureaucracy, what I really want to know is who's going to be the 20 people he sees in the White House. And I haven't a clue. So for instance, take the issue of Social Security or Medicare, particularly Social Security, where he said all sorts of things about protecting Social Security and was viewed as an apostate by many Republicans because he talked about protecting Social Security. But the fact is, I don't think that his advisors, the ones that have been seen, are particularly interested in that position. So we don't know what he will do when the rubber hits the road and he has to come up with a budget. On the whole, my guess is that a Trump budget will not look very different from a Paul Ryan budget. And that means the Affordable Care Act is gone, it means Medicaid is block granted, and means Medicare is privatized. And I think there's a serious chance that all three of those things happen.
Just add one thing on domestic policy versus national security and foreign policy that I think has come out, but it's important to emphasize. In foreign policy, areas of national security, the president has a tremendous amount of leeway, and one president, if he wakes up in the morning and decides he wants to push things in a particular direction, has tremendous ability to do that. A lot of unilateral authority in trade policy, a lot of unilateral ability to withdraw from existing international agreements, a lot of unilateral authority to alter the way the federal government projects force externally around the world. Domestically, despite the way, and I think Joe made this point, despite the way candidates talk, altering things that way is exceedingly difficult. And just to use one example, the Clean Power Plan. Trump has suggested he's not a fan of the Clean Power Plan. Some 27 states are in court challenging the Clean Power Plan. Almost all states that are controlled by Republicans, a lot of pressure within the party to do something about the Clean Power Plan. But the regulation's on the books. It's already been, the case against it has already been argued in the D.C. Circuit. It's not as if the president can just pick up the phone and say, oh yeah, drop our defense of the rule, rip those pages out of the CFR and go home. Because that will itself provoke counter litigation. There are interveners in that case that are supporting the rule. To actually undo that rule requires there being appointees who have the legal and other technical expertise to understand how you alter an agency's formal position, what you have to do in the rulemaking process to justify that so it survives judicial review, and you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. And we have seen administrations, most recently the Bush administration, that for whatever reason didn't pay attention to those details in policy areas that weren't particularly important, and as a result, a lot of what they tried to do administratively gets thrown out in court. And so in domestic policy, the ability of the president to actually follow through on promises, if the president's not willing to appoint the right people and deploy political capital, is far more limited than it is in the national security and foreign policy context. And that's just an important thing to keep in mind.
Okay. I do want to open it up to questions. I am going to ask, though, that please people ask a question so that we can make sure that it's a good, engaged dialogue, please. Someone over here? Keisha. Just wait for the microphone, please.
But keep the mic because that's for the
Oh, it is
broadcast.
recording,
Yeah.
possibly?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got it.
Hot potato. So I want to, I guess my question, if I could shape it a little bit, specifically to the remarks that Professor Caleres made. You referred to this as being like the Kim Kardashian meets politics. And I really just take issue with that analogy because what I see it as is white supremacy. I mean, on its face, that's what this is. And it doesn't seem, that was not discussed by any of the panelists. You know, the impact that white supremacy, the history of this country, how black progression, minority progression historically has been followed by the rise of white supremacy, and how, you know, his very charged, bigoted, sexist language somehow made it to the main stage and got the main stage support. And so if you could talk a little bit about how white supremacy, bigotry, all of that plays into us being in this place right now in 2016.
I absolutely agree with you that the comments made by the president-elect were oftentimes absolutely disrespectful of people who are part of our society, of different races, ethnicities. Oftentimes, his comments about women were absolutely deplorable, and people from all portions of the spectrum agree to that. The comment I made in regard to him being very skilled at targeting a message that appeals to the worst in some people in our society is not necessarily an approving comment. It's not an approving comment at all. It is a descriptive comment. So it's not a normative comment in the sense that I actually approve of that by any means. I had to console a daughter at 2:30 in the morning who was in New York City, waiting for.
You too.
Right. So I very much understand and identify with the criticism, but part of politics and part of this exercise is being able to recognize where some mistakes were mistakes by the Clinton team, the mistakes that the Clinton team made, merit of the Trump campaign in actually, in a perverse way, focusing on the worst in our society, and given our history, our charged history. But he was able to capitalize this symbolically, and by repeating scandals or offenses almost on a daily basis. At certain times, he became more disciplined and more on message in the final weeks of his campaign.
Let's let just another panelist get in.
Okay. I want to, Catherine, I sympathize with your point also. Let's be clear. Donald Trump stomped on a lot of norms of civilized discourse and at least empowered people with the most egregious sorts of attitudes. But it's not like Donald Trump is a uniquely bad actor here. A lot of the standard norms of civic life have been ignored for some time. We can go back to that congressman from South Carolina who twice in President Obama's speech to a joint session of Congress in 2009 stood up and said, "You lie." We have people saying defaulting on the national debt is a perfectly plausible policy option. We have people saying it's fine to shut down the government if we don't get our way on everything. Donald Trump comes out of that. Now, I don't mean to suggest that Trump is a unique villain. I think we are in a very bad place. I think that different people may have different takes on how we got here. But I think those of us who are distressed about this need to think about how to deal with this in a constructive way. So, for example, back in 1930, when Charles Houston began to think about the state of segregation, it was clear he wanted to get segregation outlawed. But he also knew that if he went into court in the 1930s and argued that Plessy against Ferguson was an outrage, a perfectly reasonable argument, would have no chance of success. I think we ought to take some lessons from Houston and Thurgood Marshall, who were able to combine their head and their heart to come up with a long-term strategy to get from where we are to someplace better. I am concerned now that we have just come out of a campaign where people's feelings are so raw that we may not be able to have that kind of hard-headed discussion, that kind of hard-headed conversation. I don't claim to have a lot of answers, but I think that those are the right sorts of questions for us to be thinking about, not just today, but going forward.
I had a question. This is for Professor
and the other panelists. One of the questions is dealing with the Fourth Amendment and the other things. What bodes well do you foresee on the horizon relevant to the Fourth Amendment and also issues around racial profiling relevant to on a federal level, and also the escalation of the war on drugs and so forth, and the immigration laws? Now, what do you see as that? The second part of the question has to deal with, as you indicated, there's a lot of unilateral or fiat process in terms of incursions, such as we had in Grenada, Libya, and so forth. Do you see an escalation of this, or what happened in Korea in the 50s? Do you see an escalation of it? So let me reiterate what I said.
That's not necessary.
Okay.
I got the question. So on the Fourth Amendment, I mean, I think there's only bad news, and that's already started the Supreme Court. Generally, there's you have Justice Sotomayor maybe as your lone dissenter in many a case. So I certainly don't have an optimistic view with respect to that. With respect to foreign incursions, I think it's really hard to say about Donald Trump. He's really all over the map at one moment, seeming like an isolationist, at another moment speaking quite muscularly. So I don't know that I could predict. We can continue to talk.
Somebody leaned up against them. Yeah.
We can whistle or talk in the dark, but Jonathan Adler, looked like you were shaking your head disagreeing.
I do disagree on part of that. I mean, on the racial profiling part, there's no reason to think that President Trump cares much about that issue, or that anyone he would nominate would care much about that issue. On Fourth Amendment issues and issues of criminal defendants' rights more generally, I actually think that in the near term at least, and I'm not someone who's a fan of Donald Trump, not someone who supported him. I think he was a uniquely a horrible political figure in many ways. But there's reason to actually think that his victory is pretty good for criminal defendants and better than the alternative. And let me explain why. Number one, Justice Scalia, as many people don't appreciate, was in many areas of the law arguably the most criminal defense protective justice on the court, because where rights of criminal defendants were enumerated, he would not consider any exceptions and would enforce those quite stringently, and would join with more liberal justices in doing that. And so the split on the court in those issues tended not to be left-right, but formalist pragmatist, and Scalia was really the leader of that. And so on the Confrontation Clause and issues like the jury trial right and so on, he was really the primary mover on those issues, incredibly important. Also incredibly important in making sure that our understanding of, say, what constitutes a search incorporates modern technology. Judge Merrick Garland, who is a very intelligent, very capable, a very distinguished federal judge, if one looks at his record on the D.C. Circuit, he was a uniquely pro-government vote in the cases that he sat on. In cases where he disagreed with his colleagues on the outcome of a case, there's not a single one where he disagreed with his colleagues in a pro-criminal defendant way. In 15 plus years on an appellate court, that's pretty remarkable. So given the list of names that Donald Trump has said that he will choose from to replace Justice Scalia, there is good reason to believe that his nominee, at least for this spot, will be more protective of criminal defendants' rights than a Justice Garland would have been. Now, we don't know what a Hillary Clinton nominee would have looked like. There are reasons to think that a Hillary Clinton nominee might have been more pro-criminal defendant than Merrick Garland as well. But on that one narrow issue, and people that have talked to me today, I'm looking for silver linings wherever I can find them. I think there's a reason to believe that in the near term that a Justice Diane Sykes, a Justice Bill Pryor, a Justice Don Willett, a Justice Allison Ide, or Justice Joan Larson, some of the names that Trump has identified, would do more to safeguard criminal defendants' rights than a Justice Garland would have.
I am particularly worried about Rudy Giuliani run Department of Justice, given his prior history in terms of treatment of minorities and individuals that are of different ethnicities. I think that a lot of that makes it to the courts is a microcosm of what actually happens in the day-to-day lives of people in our society, and so I'm gravely concerned. I'd like to hear other members of the panel on that issue. What if we get what we think we might get in the Department of Justice?
I mean, Giuliani or Christie.
Giuliani or someone of that, yeah.
Be awful.
I'll allow one
One
more.
thing that's
I'm glad my
that-
colleague
that-
agrees
that's-
with me.
That's really interesting, is when you look at the names that are being floated for high-level cabinet positions, if you were to like independently think, okay, who are the best folks on the Republican side of the aisle generally for policy, and come up with that list, and then look at the list of names that are, at least in the last, few days, being floated, those aren't the same lists. And some of the folks close to Trump, the Breitbart guy, whatever his name is, O'Bannon or whatever, would say that's by design. Other folks would look at it and say that no matter what one's political agenda is, that's just not the way you run a railroad. You don't want people that don't know what they're doing and that shoot from the hip to be in these sorts of positions, because there's a lot of things, there are a lot of moving parts, there are a lot of things to take care of. And the names we've seen thus far, even if one is inclined to be supportive of Donald Trump, which admittedly no one in this panel is, but even if that's your view, the names that are being floated are not names that should inspire confidence.
All right, here's what I'm going to do right now. We are at 5:30. I know we have panelists who may need to leave. We have people here who I don't want to keep. But for those who want to continue a discussion, we can certainly do so both here and outside. I would hope that we can continue and maintain a conversation of civility and good discourse, as opposed to the way much of this campaign has gone. Hey, man.